Hello everyone, I'm Broughy1322 and it's finally here, the video where I go through every single car in the game, every single class in the game, and try to fix all of the class misallocations that we've seen over the years. It's going to be an interesting one, it's going to be a big one. There's a massive spreadsheet that we're going to go through and see where I would have put cars instead of where they were actually placed in their classes. This video is brought to you by GTAcars.net, the best place for GTA vehicle info that I own and run. The latest major update added a comparison tool which allows you to compare multiple vehicles side by side on all metrics. Navigate to the Compare Vehicles page in the GTA 5 section of GTAcars.net to get started. So first of all, there's a few things I want to clear up and give you some background on before we get started and get into the nitty gritty. We're going to be sticking with the framework that we have now. So we'd all love for more classes, and while they've added a new class in the past with open wheel, the fact that they've only done it with open wheel suggests it's not going to happen again. Sure, it would be great to have the vintage class come back from GTA 4 to house things like the Roosevelts, the Tornadoes, the Peyotes, or other class ideas we've all had over the years like race cars, hypercars, sports sedans, classic and modern muscle, rally. We could go on and on. Hell, I'd even take them actually adding proper classes for the various subclasses they've added, like arena contenders or tuners, instead of them all having to be within other proper classes like sports or muscle or whatever. But I'm not going to be considering any of that this late into the game's life. I'll be sticking with the classes we have in the game right now and moving cars to different classes based on where I think they'd fit best using the current framework. Now, this also extends to their usability in races. I'd love nothing more than to have the obscure classes like service, industrial, commercial, emergency and military all be usable in races, especially emergency now that we've got a lot more cop cars in that class. But for the purposes of this, I'll be sticking to what is currently raceable, so all of the mainline classes plus vans and utility. Utility in particular is going to become an actually interesting class to use in races when I'm done with this, rather than just the joke of a class it is now where the saddler dominates and the only other stuff you're able to use are the slam truck, golf caddy, air tug and lawnmower. Now, with this, I haven't really considered lap time and general performance too much either. I will highlight as we go through certain classes that have perhaps gotten more interesting and competitive in certain areas after the vehicles have been moved to them, but race performance isn't a determining factor for where a car goes when I've been going through this. Just because some muscle car would fit perfectly in the top tier of SUVs doesn't mean that it should be there. However, I will make non-raceable cars raceable if I just think they should be usable in normal races with their weapons disabled. And obviously, moving a vehicle from a class where it can't be used in races to one where it can is another added benefit, but again, not a major driving force for a vehicle change. And of course, it was all done in a spreadsheet, which I'll link in the description and pin comment for you to peruse at your leisure, and allows you to see all the changes I've made, ordered first of all by their new class, so where they would be in terms, and it's all ordered by lap time and top speed as well, just like you would expect to see from my main master spreadsheet of lap times, top speeds and all the other kind of stuff. So you can see where it would fit in its new class, what the new classes would look like. You can also see how it appears from its old class, so you can see what was sort of removed from other classes. And then there's also a third sheet that allows you to see only the changes I've made, so you can just get a glimpse of what's moved and where it's moved to only, and get rid of all the stuff that stayed the same. So before we actually get into the nitty gritty, let's have a look at how the classes have changed in terms of their numbers. So after I've done all my changes to all the cars in these classes, the Supers class has gone up by 1, which is fairly fine. You know, the Supers wasn't too big originally. It's about right where it should be. The Sports class, however, has seen the biggest change with 33 cars removed. And actually, that's more cars that have been taken out of Sports because some cars have actually amazingly been put back in. So it goes from a class of 113 cars to 80, which is still not great. I think it's still way too big for a class, but it's better at least. Sports non-raceable as well has only got one more car in it, so we've got 3 cars that can now be raced out of the non-raceable sports cars as they are currently. Muscle has seen a big decrease as well, from 82 to 61 cars and less non-raceable cars. That's generally a trend you'll see. If I can make something raceable that is non-raceable, I will try to do that. Sports Classics has seen a big increase to go from 46 cars to 69. Nice. And it becomes even more of an interesting class, I think, because of that. Coupes saw a minor change of an extra 2 vehicles, but a lot of things were removed and added in there, so it's actually a bigger change than that looks. Sedans has gone from 39 cars to 57. It's a really big class now, and yeah, that becomes one of the biggest classes in the game after the change. It actually eclipses SUVs, which has gone from 52 to 54 vehicles. Not an awful lot of change there. Compacts has increased by 6 vehicles to go to 21 from 15. Again, I feel like 20 to 30 is a good amount for a class, and it would be nicer if we had more classes that we could have that kind of size for, but you know, it is what it is. And then vans got an extra few vehicles, which was basically just the non-raceable vehicles becoming raceable. Open wheel has gone from 4 to 6. You'll see what were added to open wheel later on. Off-road has gone from 48 cars to 44, but it's also very much like some of the other classes where a lot of things have been taken out of it and also then put back into it, especially non-raceable off-road vehicles made raceable, going from 16 in that sort of subclass down to 3. Utility has seen a massive change from 6 raceable cars all the way up to 21. The utility class is probably the biggest change that you'll see throughout the entire thing. And I really like the look of the new utility class, if you like, because we've gone also from 13 non-raceable utility vehicles to 1, which is a lot better. And then we've got commercial, which has gone from 16 to 14, not a big change. Industrial, which has got a lot of vehicles, 12 up to 25. Obviously, none of them are raceable anyway, but you'll see what I did there with that when we get to it. Service, not much of a change with that, or emergency with getting 1 vehicle extra. Military got a lot of vehicles as well, going from 13 to 25 vehicles, and again, it's a much more of a well-rounded class now. And then motorcycles has a minor change as well. So let's actually get into it, shall we? And you can see what changes I've made, starting with the Supers class. So, the Supers class, at the very start, it looks just as it does right now. No changes until we get to the Stinger TT, and the Italy GTO HSW version for the Stinger TT has been put into Supers. I feel like the Italis and the Stinger, they've got they're enough supercar-y to be supercars rather than sports cars, and their lap times fit very nicely in this tier alongside the Virtue, the XA21, that kind of stuff, especially when you consider their top speeds are better than the supercars around this area. And then further down, we've got the Italia RSX as well that I chucked into Supers. It just looks more like a supercar to me, and it fits, again, incredibly nicely in this tier where we've got tons of vehicles that are within sort of 3/10 of each other, and it fits beautifully in there, which would, you know, just add to those races that have those kind of vehicles and limited to those tiers. The Corsica I also felt like was a bit more of a supercar than a sports car, so I put that in there as well. Again, fits very nicely with the Entity XF, the Turismo R, stuff like that. And then obviously if the Stinger TT HSW is going into Supers, so is the regular Stinger TT. And again, fits nicely there. And that's your Supers class. That the only 5 vehicles added to Supers, a few removed, but you'll see those obviously when we get through. And yeah, I think the Supers class in general isn't too bad. You know, it's a fairly well-rounded class. It has most proper Supers in. I just felt like there was a few sports cars that really could have been in Supers instead. But now we come to the sports class, and again, because this is ordered by the new class that we're going through at the moment, I will sort of show some highlights from the other sheets. You're not going to see the huge amount of sports cars that have been removed. We've already seen some of them in the Supers class, but you'll see that as we go through. Instead, this is going to highlight the things that are now in the sports class, or would be if I had my way. And obviously, with this is all my opinion. What I would normally do is probably take this to a stream and see what people thought and fine-tune it. I didn't want to do that for this. I just wanted to give my bare thoughts on this and get your opinions in the comments. So as we go through this, if there's anything you don't agree with or you feel like you would change, let me know in the comments, and it would be interesting to see or tell me what you do agree with and which ones are the most popular changes. So sports, it sticks with what it has right now with stuff like the Niobe, the Lacarouse, Banshee GTS at the top. And we go through until we get to the Armoured Paragon R, which is still a sports car, but it goes from non-raceable to raceable. No reason for it not to be raceable, really. You just disable the weapons like they've done for many other cars, like the Ardent, the Revolter, I think, has its weapons disabled if you put them on, Comet Safari, stuff like that. Just make it raceable. And then the SC1 was previously in the Supers class, and when it was added, it didn't really feel like a supercar to me, and I've finally made that change to put it in the sports class. It fits nicely alongside the 9Fs, the 8Fs. Yeah, it's a sports car. I don't know why it was ever put in Supers. Banshee 900R and Sultan RS also, I don't know why they were ever put in Supers. Put it in, insert the donation sound here. Back in 2016, we obviously had the regular Banshee and the regular Sultan in the sports class, and then they added these Benny's upgrades that were basically sports cars in terms of their performance too, but they just put them in Supers for whatever reason. So I've finally been able to fix that and put them back into the sports class where they should have been, alongside all the other Banshees and all the other Sultans. Those are there now as well, instead of being at the back end of the Supers class. And then Voltic as well, another one that was in Supers from the very early days that I felt like it's just more sports car territory. That came more from its lap time from back then, I think, because it was just so far off the pace. But even now, I still think it's got more of a sports car look than a supercar look. So yeah, I thought I'd fix that one too. We've got the hot rings, the regular stuff, and that's your sports class. So it's been a few cars from the Supers class moved into sports in the same way that we saw a few cars from the sports class moved into Supers. You might notice, though, that obviously there's a lot less sports cars, and that's because we're going to see them dotted about in other classes. And I think just in general, this is a much more well-rounded sports class. Everything in here feels like a sports car, short of being able to have separate classes for tuners or rally cars or something like that. Sports has to encompass quite a lot of vehicles, but it doesn't need to have quite as many different variety of vehicles as what we experience as it is right now. And at this point, I'll just give a quick note that generally the only stuff that remains in non-raceable cars are cars with sort of super high levels of boost, like the Vigilante, the Scramjet, and the Rocket Voltic, which have stayed non-raceable. They cause too much of an issue if you were to try to race them, together with other vehicles. And alongside that, it's basically arena vehicles like the ZR380 for the sports class. All of those kind of vehicles are still going to remain non-raceable, but beyond that, I've tried to take all of the currently non-raceable stuff. If it cannot all be made raceable, I've made it that way. And at this point, I'll just show you the other sheet, which shows you sort of ordered by their old class, so you can see what's been removed. Obviously, with Supers, we see it's more the back end of the Supers with the SC1, the Banshees, the Banshee, the Sultan, the Voltic being removed. And with the sports, some of the faster stuff put up into Supers. And then obviously as we go further down, we see that there's a lot of stuff that was removed from the sports class, which we'll see later on in their respective classes. And as we get further towards the very back end, yeah, I've basically gutted out the whole bottom end of the sports class. So now the slowest car in the sports class for raceable cars is the Ruston with a 107.7, which to me is a much more realistic slowest sports car than what is currently the slowest sports car, which is nearly 10 seconds a lap slower. So moving on to muscle, this is where we see a number of those sort of vehicles inherited from the sports class. It starts off very much the same until we get to the Sprunk Buffalo, and you'll notice a pattern as we go through this that I've tried to group cars together where they have other vehicles. So back in the day, people always said that, the original Buffalo and the Buffalo S, they should be in the muscle class rather than sports. I wasn't necessarily agreeing with that in terms of when I was looking at it from a performance perspective, because they handled just like regular cars when you consider they were very different and a lot easier, just like regular sports cars, they were a lot easier to drive than, say, the Dominator, which was, the top dog in the muscle class at the time. But now, yeah, they should be put in the muscle class, because you've got things like the Buffalo EVX, you've got high traction cars like the Buffalo STX in the muscle class now. Everything's just become a glorified grippy sports class, so might as well just put them there. And then all the Buffaloes are together in the same way that I tried to get all the Banshees together and all the Sultans together in sports. We're going to try to get all the Buffaloes together here, and that requires moving them from the sports class to the muscle class. Same with the drift tamper alongside the Tamper GT, and the regular tamper moved from sports to muscle, keeps everything together in the same style of vehicle together as it should be. Weaponized tamper also becomes available and to race in my new class system, if you like. And that's basically it in terms of, apart from obviously making some of these non-raceable cars raceable, like the Ruiner 2000. That's my muscle class. It's largely the same as what it is, but again, more things have been removed from muscle than have been added to muscle, as we'll see as we go through. I can show you on this this clip that, you know, a lot of stuff has kind of been taken away from muscle, especially as we get further to the back end of it. So we'll see that as we go through. And then again, it's the sort of arena vehicles that stay non-raceable with the muscle class. Now, sports classics. This has inherited quite a lot of vehicles from both sports and muscle. And my thoughts for this were that, you know, the sports classics class, obviously it started out as proper classic cars, things like the Z-Type, the Monroe, Pigalle, but over time it's kind of morphed into more of a sort of late 80s class as well. So anything from the late 80s, really early 90s, obviously also gets put into sports classics. So with that in mind, I've tried to take some of those vehicles that fit that time period from other classes and put them now into sports classics. With the Sentinel Classics, the Comet Retro Custom, for example, would be perfect examples of that. I think they fit quite well alongside things like the Uranus Loz Speed. You know, they're not like a Turismo Classic or a Cheetah Classic or a Z-Type or anything like that, but I think they're very similar to stuff like the Retinue Mark II and, like I say, the Uranus Loz Speed. If those kind of cars are getting put into sports classics now, then these cars can just get out of sports, because sports is too much. There's too many sports cars. Get them into sports classics alongside other vehicles that are very similar. And the fact that they have classic in their name also sort of, you know, helps my case with that, I think. Remus, another example of that. And then we come to some of the muscle cars like the Clique. Obviously, the Deluxe and the Stromberg, I don't see any reason why they can't be raceable anyway. We might as well just, you know, put those in the raceable class. But the Clique is one that's in muscle that, to me, it just feels more like a sports classic car. The way that it looks, the way that it is, it doesn't feel muscle car to me. Like, you know, I'm not exactly an expert on muscle cars, for example, but you guys might disagree. But to me, the Clique feels a lot better in classics alongside the Swinger, alongside the Infernus Classic, the Sterling GT. It fits nicely with those kind of lap times as well. And yeah, that just, to me, that feels where it should be over and above the muscle class. Same with the Coquette Blackfin, alongside now all of the other classic Coquettes, well, like the Coquette Classic, for example, the Hermes. Another example of, these are examples of muscle cars alongside the Clique, where I just think they're more sports classic-y to me rather than muscle cars. Obviously, I've made the JB700W raceable as well. It's just identical to the JB700 anyway. And then as we get closer to the bottom end of sports classics, we start to see some of the other slower muscle cars and sport cars, if you like. So the Peyote Gasser, obviously the regular Peyote and the Peyote Custom are in the sports classics class. I don't see why the Peyote Gasser should be any different. It's a Peyote, same idea with the Buffaloes previously and the Sultans and the Banshee. The Virgo Classics, things like that. Virgo, Eudora. Obviously the Manana Custom was a big one that I've complained about quite a lot over the years, how we have the Peyote in the Sports Classics class, the Peyote Custom is in the Sports Classics class, the Manana is in the Sports Classics class, and then they make the Manana Custom to be put in the Muscle class. So I've fixed that, and that's back in Sports Classics where it should be. And yeah, a lot of those sort of lower down muscle cars, Virgo, Broadway, Chino, Customs, Chinos, the Clique Wagon, obviously if the Clique is going to get moved, the Clique Wagon should, Virgo Classic, Voodoo Custom, the Voodoo, Stafford, they just fit so well, in my opinion, with all of the other slow sports classics cars like the Peyote, the Tornadoes, the Dynasty, for example. It just feels, you know, where they should be. Again, it would be better to have all of these vehicles in their own really slow class, like Vintage or something like that. But they just, to me, they should all be together in the end of sports classics. Get them out of muscle, where to me they don't really fit there anyway. So sports classics, to me, it's a lot more interesting with all of these cars added, and it gets some sort of, I guess, not really muscle cars, more classic-y cars out of muscle, and then also rounds it out with some of the faster sort of late 80s cars as well, early 90s stuff that now is getting put into sports classics. So big change for sports classics. It is one of my favourite classes as it is right now, and I think adding all these cars to it would make it just even better and even more interesting. Probably the biggest change of like all the sort of mainline raceable classes, if you like. Then obviously the Toreador is the only one that remains non-raceable. Coupes now. Now, Coupes had a lot of potential. I think it has a lot of potential still, but the problem is that everything just gets put into sports or not thought about and just, not really. The Coupes class didn't get a DLC car for 5 years. It was forgotten about for 5 years. So I've tried to address that and fix that, and a lot of the sports cars that have been removed have found their way into Coupes. The 300R, the Euros, the Alpha, which was a very old one originally that I thought should have been perfect in Coupes back then. The Lynx joins its, older brother of the F620 in the Coupes class. The Panther, all these sort of, smaller sport cars that were just chucked into the sports class that look like Coupes. They would go perfectly in the Coupes class in terms of lap time. When you look at all this, it would really fill out the top of the class in terms of what's raceable, and it just feels like a much better fit to put these cars here than in the sports class alongside a bunch of other stuff that it just gets forgotten about. So it's a much more interesting class here, the Coupes class. The Rapid GT Cabrios, both the Rapid GTs, are both in here as well. The Fusillade, the Schwarzer, the Penumbra, just some of these slower sports cars as well that have that sort of coupe body style. Just stick them in the Coupes class. That's what it's there for. And Coupes becomes a much more interesting class when you consider a lot of these vehicles. I mean, I don't think I've even ever raced the Panther since it was released, because it's just in the sports class with a 106 lap time alongside 10 other cars in that area and just gets completely forgotten about. But put it in Coupes, you're right there with the Lynx, the Sentinel XS, the Zions, and you can have an interesting race. Same with some of these other cars, the 300R, the Euros, fighting at the top of Coupes, maybe. It just makes it a much more interesting and well-rounded class, Coupes, and I think addresses some of the fact that it's been forgotten about all these years, and just all the cars that could have gone there have just been put into sports instead. So, sedans. You can see at the very top of sedans, this has also inherited a lot of sports cars, and I've talked about this numerous times over the years, that there's a bunch of four-door sedans in sports that would go perfectly at the top of the sedans class to really fill it out, and they just got launched into sports anyway. The Raiden would be at the top of the sedans class, but I think there's a good balance there because it has a terrible top speed, whereas some of this other stuff like the VSTR, even the Cinquemila that's currently in the sedans class, they've got better top speed, so there would be a bit of balance there. And when you look at it, if you take out the Raiden, which obviously its main disadvantage is its top speed, you've got a bunch of cars here that are separated by basically a second at the top of the sedans class, and it's all mixed with current sedans and a bunch of sedans that just happen to be put in the sports class. The Komoda, the Revolta, the VSTR, they're all balanced with each other, and they should really be in the sedans class alongside, obviously, the Shafter V12, which is technically in the sports class, but I would just move it fully into the sedans class, and there's no point in it being in sports anyway. And then, alongside the Reinhardt, Chavos V6, Cinquemila, the top of sedans becomes really interesting once you get some of these sporty sedans out of sports and into sedans instead. What else have we got? Some of the four-door coupes from back in 2013 that people always complained about. Coupe can't have four doors. That was a common thing back in 2013. I've just thought, let's just get them out of coupes as well. Put them into sedans. So the Felons, the Exemplar, the Jackal, the Segoy as well from the sports class, and obviously the Shafter LWB. Just these sort of Oracle, the Oracles are the biggest ones. I don't know why they're in coupes. They look like sedans. The Windsors as well. I've thought, let's get them out of these other classes. Let's get them in sedans where they probably should be. These bigger four-door vehicles that you would utilize more as a sedan and a family vehicle. And alongside some of the more higher performing 4-door stuff, is now all in the sedans class. And again, just like Coupes, I think it makes it a much more well-rounded class, and all the way through. We've even got some of the muscle cars like the Lurcher and the Brigham that, to me, they fit much better in sedans than they ever would in muscle. They're not muscle cars to me, the Brigham and the Lurcher. These big bulky vehicles like that, they fit the best in sedans, so I've stuck them there. And it becomes an interesting class, I think. Obviously, the turreted limo also giving that the ability to be raced, and the stretch as well. So we get the only two non-raceable cars in the sedans class of the turreted limo and the stretch. They become raceable. Then there's nothing that can't be raced in sedans, and it becomes quite a big class as well at this point. Okay, so next up is SUVs, and this hasn't really seen much in the way of changes. It's pretty standard, the SUVs class. I think all SUVs end up here basically, and it's a pretty well-rounded class as it is. The only change I've made is to take the Strider out of sports and stick it in SUVs. It actually fits quite well with the lap time that it has around the Dorado, XLS, Huntley S area. But yeah, how the Strider ended up getting put in sports, I have absolutely no idea. It fits better in SUVs to me, and that's where I've put it. And that's the only change I've made, apart from making the Dubster 6x6. Yeah, so the Dubster 6x6 is weird sometimes. The stock version is usable in SUV races, if I remember correctly. But it is actually in the off-roads class, and your custom version can only be used in off-road races. I've just put it in SUVs as well. I think it's more... It should be alongside the other Dubsters, if you like, in the SUVs class, more than just being in the off-roads class with a bunch of stuff that, yes, it does have some off-road capabilities, the Dubster 6x6, but I think it fits more in SUVs than it does off-roads. So yeah, SUVs, only 2 vehicles added to it. I don't think we removed anything from SUVs either, and that's basically it. It's probably the best class SUVs in terms of needing the least changes. The right stuff goes in SUVs throughout the entire class. Compacts, on the other hand, Compacts has finally gotten the blister compact. From the very early days of GTA, the first proper bad class misallocation, we had the regular blister in the compacts class, and then we got the blister compact in the sports class. It was at the back of the sports class. It was way off the pace. There was no reason for it to be there. It would have fit perfectly in the compacts class alongside the Panto and the Rhapsody, as you can see there. Perfectly balanced lap time wise. The Go-Go Monkey blister is obviously just identical to the blister compact. They're finally now in the compacts class, in my world, in what I've done here at least, in my fantasies. This is never going to happen in the game, of course, but if I was to control it, it would. I've also thought, let's get the small Futos out of the sports class as well. Fit much better in compacts. They are compact cars. They're tiny little things. The same for the Acia. Even though it's a 4-door car in the sedans class, it's so small, and its lap time does work quite well in this sort of tier of Rhapsody, Panto, Blister Compact. Let's just have it in compacts, because it's such a small car. I think that's where it should be. The only other change here is that I've made the Dilettante Patrol version raceable. It's just basically a stock Dilettante in terms of performance, but why not just have it available to use? But yeah, basically taking a few of the slower sports cars, getting them out of sports where they're useless anyway, and putting them in the compact class where they can be, well, they just fit better. And after all these years, it's finally nice to be able to, since it hasn't ever happened in the game, finally nice to be able to actually, at least in my mind, or at least in this spreadsheet, put the blister compact in the compacts class, and all the blisters are now together in the same way that we had all the Buffaloes together, all the Banshees together. That's the general theme that I've gone for with some of this as well. And on that note, we've got another pretty serious class misallocation to fix here with the Moonbeam. The Moonbeam has been removed from muscle and put into vans, going straight to the top of the class in the vans class. It doesn't have the top speed of the Gang Burrito, but it's got so much better grip it probably would be in a tier all on its own. But this is an example of why I'm not considering lap time when it comes to stuff like this, because You know, you could say, okay, well, let's not move the Moonbeam because it'll just destroy the class, but that's not how it should be. The Moonbeam and the Moonbeam Custom, they need to be in the Vans class. They shouldn't be in Muscle. How they were put in Muscle, I have no idea, but in my world, they're in the Vans class alongside the Armoured Boxville, which is in the Vans class, but it's not raceable. Just make it raceable, why not? And there you go. We got the Moonbeam alongside the other Vans where it should be, and we can actually have a race of actual Vans. And it also gets it out of what is a very bloated Muscle class as well at the moment. The rest of the Vans class, it's basically the same apart from making the non-raceable cars raceable, which in this case is just, like I said, the Armoured Boxville and the 2 Burritos, which is, they're identical in terms of performance as well. They're just stock burritos. The only difference with the Bugstars burrito is that you can upgrade it and, you know, put engine, turbo, transmission on it to make it faster. But yeah, why not just have them available? Just make them raceable. It makes no difference. And then you've got them quite well balanced with the Yuga Custom that has the better top speed while they have the better lap time. So that's Vans, open wheel. Yeah, the Vitols are now in the open wheel class. The reason for this is they are karts. You know, they are the entryway to motorsport for most people. Any Formula One driver will have started in go-karting, and it makes no difference if they're not raceable in sports races or they're not raceable in open wheel races. I guess I could change this to be technically open wheel, not raceable, if you like, but for the sake of easiness, they're in the open wheel class. I don't see a reason why they shouldn't be used in open wheel races, just for the fun of it. You know, you can load up an open wheel race and you can have a BR8 up against a Vito Modern, for example. But to me, the open wheel class is just the obvious place for them. They're not sports cars, they're not off-road cars, they're not any other class apart. The open wheel is where they fit best, and considering you can't use them in sports races anyway, they've just got their own little kart class. Well, it's a subclass. Just stick them in open wheel, because that's really what they are. You know, the Vito Modern is just a very, very basic version of a BR8. You could look at it that way. So yeah, the Vitos are taken out of sports and put into open wheel, and I think that just makes the most sense to me. Off-road now. Off-road has had a lot of changes, a lot in terms of stuff removed, but also a lot of stuff added. Now, one of the main ones that you can see here is the Comet Safari. This one kind of goes a little bit against the idea of keeping the same kind of cars together. Now, that isn't perfect all the way through this, obviously. You'll be able to find counter-arguments to it. But obviously, you would assume that all the other Comets are in the sports class. Just keep the Comet Safari there. And I wouldn't be against that. I'm not, totally married to this idea. But the Comet Safari, to me, feels more off-road car than it does sports car. And that's generally how, if there's been anything that sort of straddles the line of two classes, that's how I make the decision. Is it more of one than another? If it is, I'll stick it there. And for me, the Comet Safari, it's more of an off-roader than it is a sports car, so I've stuck it in the off-roads class. It fits quite well with the regular monstrosity without HSW upgrades. The Blazer Aqua, there's going to be a number of these in off-roads, because off-roads had 16 vehicles that are not usable in off-road races. So there's going to be a number of those where I've just stuck them as raceable. Why not? There's no reason really for a lot of the non-raceable stuff to be not raceable. Here's a bunch of the others as well. The regular Cara, the Technicals, I think they're quite correct to be in the off-roads class, but I'd just make them raceable. Disable the weapons, obviously, and then you can just use them in regular races alongside other stuff. The Dune can be used in off-road races, but it is technically in the service class. I don't think that's correct. I think it always should have been in the off-road class. It's a Dakar rally kind of vehicle. It's an off-road racing vehicle. To me, it should be an off-road, so I'd officially remove it from service and put it in off-roads where it really should be and where it's raceable anyway. Same thing with the Wastelander. That would also have an added benefit of making the Wastelander raceable, because obviously nothing in the service class is raceable at the moment. The Dune was just an exception that they made usable in off-road races, so the Wastelander becomes raceable as well by putting it into off-roads. And then another bunch of non-raceable stuff becoming raceable: the regular Technical, the Space Docker, and the RC Bandito. It would be quite fun to have a Jabba versus an RC Bandito. Why not? I don't see a problem with that. Just make it raceable in regular races. If someone wants to choose it, or you want to do some fun, wacky races with it, why not? And then that means that there's only 3 non-raceable off-road vehicles: the Sasquatch, the Brutus, and the Bruiser. Again, all arena vehicles that they can have too much stuff on them to be usable in regular races, in my opinion. When it comes to custom versions of them, maybe making the stock versions raceable would be fine, but yeah, not the custom versions. Now, utility, and you'll see that it's basically just a wall of blue. If you haven't noticed, by the way, blue means it's been changed. Only 2 vehicles that are currently in the utility class remain in my utility class, in what I would have the utility class to be. Everything else has been gutted completely from it. And before we get onto utility, I'll show you where it's all gone. It's not commercial, it's industrial. I've taken basically every single non-raceable utility vehicle, so you can't race with it anyway, so you're not losing out on anything, and just stuck them in stuck them in industrial. Utility trucks, I can understand that being a little bit controversial because it's in the name, utility. But, scrap truck, Ripley, dock tug, forklift, Fieldmaster, the air tug, the tractor, the lawnmower, I've just stuck them all in industrial alongside things like the dump, the dock handler, the cutter, the dozer, all of these super slow stuff. To me, they should all go together in the industrial class. They're not doing anything in utility anyway. And what that does is it frees up the utility class to become a lot more interesting. So before I get into the top, the only thing that's not raceable in utility is actually a not raceable muscle vehicle, which is the slam van, the arena slam van. And the reason I've moved it into utility in the first place is because the regular slam van has been moved from muscle to utility. So it's just keeping them together. It makes no difference. It's going to be not raceable wherever it is. But yeah. So at the top of utility, we've got the Firebolt. And I've tried to make utility into, the utility vehicles in terms of vehicles that will provide a function and will be useful, but also are regular vehicles that you could use in your day-to-day. So, vehicles with beds and utes and stuff like that. Stuff that's going to be useful, but also a normal vehicle. It's not just a utility truck that's used in, around the city by workers or something like that. So Firebolt, it's currently in off-roads. And a lot of these are also in off-roads as well. And I think it was a mistake to have them in off-roads, when utility is right there as a super underutilized class, that it could get all of these vehicles and become a lot more interesting. And none of them feel like off-road vehicles to me. The Firebolt ASP, to me, it's not an off-road vehicle. It doesn't feel off-roady in any way. So I've chosen to put it all in utility, and I guess it might be a little bit controversial to be doing the same with the Yosemites and the Slam Vans, especially when it comes to the Slam Van Custom or the regular Yosemite. I've taken those from muscle and put them in utility as well, but it's for the same reason that I feel like there's a lot of these vehicles that have just been put in these other classes that would flesh out a utility vehicle class, and to me, they fit a little better in utility than they do in their original class. Same with the Boer, the Yosemite Rancher. This also has the added benefit of getting all the Yosemites together. So we got the regular Yosemite, the Drift one, the Yosemite Rancher, which is currently in off-roads. They're currently split up in different classes. They'd all be in utility with this idea. Other sort of off-road muscle cars like the Bodie, the Picador, all the Slam Vans are together in the utility class as well, including the Lost version and the Slam Van Custom. The Guardian is currently in the industrial class and it's usable in off-road races. I don't think it fits in either of those. I think it's much better in the utility class. It's a big bulking utility vehicle. It's just to me, that's just where it fits. And the precursor to all of this dates back all the way to 2013 when we had the Sadler at the top of utility, which is still at the top of utility. It's still here. It would be way down the order, but that's totally fine with me. The Sadler and the Bison are basically almost identical vehicles. They look very similar. They serve the same purpose. They're almost the same in terms of their performance. They're these utility vehicles with a bed on the back that you can use, and one of them was in utility, which to me is where it should be with the Sadler, and the Bison was put in vans. It just made no sense even back then. And that sort of thinking has gone all the way throughout the game. The utility has always been an underutilized class, and it started with the Bison not joining the Saddler in the class. And since then, we've had all sorts of vehicles put into different classes that really, in my opinion, should have all been in utility. Same thing with the Rancher XL. I feel like that's a lot more of a utility vehicle than an off-road vehicle. And then some of the slow muscle cars like the Rat Truck, the Rat Loader, the Slam Van, like I mentioned earlier, all put into the utility class more so than I think they fit in utility a lot more than they do muscle. And it also brings together the Rat Loader, the Rat Truck, and the Dune Loader, which are all sort of intertwined vehicles, but currently some are in muscle and some are in off-road. So obviously the Slam Truck stays there as well. I think it just makes such an interesting utility class this way. You look at the lap times of some of these vehicles, and some of them are quite close. You'd have some interesting races, and especially down the back end, the mix of some currently muscle cars, utility cars, vans, all together. It's an interesting mix, and I think it just makes so much sense to have the utility class be an actual functional class that has stuff in that you can actually use in races, because the utility class is a raceable vehicle, a raceable class. It just, why not have these vehicles there where they would actually enhance a class rather than it just being forgotten about? It's kind of like Coupes, but a much worse situation for utility. So my utility class is a lot different to what it is now, and in my personal opinion, I think it's a lot better, but you can obviously let me know your thoughts down below. And that's really the biggest change that we've seen. I think that's the biggest change that we see throughout the whole of this, and the biggest change that we've got left. Commercial is basically exactly the same. Nothing was added to commercial. 2 items were removed from commercial, which we'll see. Obviously, industrial got a lot of stuff from utility. I think it just fits better there. And then the service class, I also added 3 of the utility vehicles into there. So all of the 3 caddies, I felt like they're not really usable. They're not industrial vehicles. I think they fit better in service vehicles alongside the taxis, tour buses, stuff like that. So emergency got 1 vehicle, which is the Blazer Lifeguard. Currently it's in the off-road class. I don't see why it shouldn't just be in the emergency class alongside the regular Lifeguard. It is basically an emergency vehicle like that. Nothing was removed from emergency, obviously, as you might expect. And then the military class, this got a lot of vehicles as well, mainly from off-roads, and mainly a lot of non-raceable off-road vehicles as well. So not stuff that you're going to miss in terms of you can't use it anyway, but stuff that, to me, I don't know why it was never put in military in the first place, especially something like the Insurgents, the regular Insurgent, the Insurgent Pickup Custom, the Insurgent Pickup, the Patriot Mil-Spec, Dune FAV, Menacer, weaponized vehicles that, they look like militaristic vehicles, and they're put in off-roads for some reason. And when most of them aren't raceable in off-roads either, what's the point? They might as well just go in military. So there's also an element that, some of these raceable off-road vehicles could still be usable in off-road races. You don't need to, just because they're getting put into military, the same argument can be made for the utility vehicles that are removed. We've seen multiple instances like the Dune, for example, where it's in the service class, but it's usable in off-road races. You could do the same with a bunch of these as well. The Insurgent, it's in the military class, but it's also usable in off-road races. You can still do that, but to me, they're military vehicles. They should be in the military class. The military class doesn't really have an awful lot in it as of right now. It's not that interesting, and I think all of these vehicles would just pad it out a lot better and make it a lot more interesting. These are the 2 commercial vehicles that were removed as well. The Cerberus and the Terabyte. I feel like they're better fits in military than they are commercial. And that's the only difference in the commercial class as it is right now. The Winky also, to me, it's a military vehicle. Just like the Crusader is a military vehicle, even though it's just, a normal sort of little SUV type thing. The Winky is also the same idea. That's much more a military vehicle than should be in off-roads. And you can, again, make it raceable in off-roads if you want, but it's not exactly going to do much. Speaking of, I've just realised, and I'll make this change for the before the video goes up, so the spreadsheet is correct. the Jabba should probably also be in military, I would have thought. It's more of a military vehicle than an off-road vehicle, I think. So I'll make that change as well and disregard what I said previously about the RC Bandito being able to race with the Jabba. Or you can still make it in off-road races, but yeah, it feels more of a military vehicle than an off-road vehicle, I think. Because, yeah, to me, off-road is like sort of things that the regular person would be able to own, you know, and it's the same with utility. Off-road and utility should have regular vehicles that are off-roady or that can be utilized by a regular person, bought by a regular person, whereas things in the industrial class or the military class are things that regular people aren't going to use. There might be some crossover in their use cases, but regular people aren't going to use, you know, you're not going to find someone down your street who owns a Jabba, for example. So I think it fits better in military, and that was just a last one that I thought I'd change there. I don't think anything's been removed from military, so I've just added stuff to it. And yeah, the Winky is the slowest of those. Motorcycles, the last one, there's only been a few small changes, mainly making non-raceable vehicles raceable with the Manchester Scout C. Well, that's it actually. Only the Manchester Scout C, the current non-raceable vehicles, still the two Oppressors and the Death Bike. I think it's fair enough that none of those are raceable in regular races. But the Raptor, I figured, let's just get the Raptor out of the sports class and put it with other three-wheeled vehicles in motorcycles. It could be a controversial one because it's not technically a motorcycle, I guess, but you know what? It's got three wheels. I feel like it's more of a motorcycle than it is a sports car. It's got one, you know, it's the one wheel at the back sort of thing. That's where I've decided to put it. So that's it. That is everything. And obviously, as you can see, it's all, you can check the other sheet to see everything ordered by its old class. So you can see what's been removed from each classes. You know, you can look here at coupes and you can see all those sort of four-door coupes have been removed. When you look at the sedans class, you see how the ACA has been removed to go to compacts, for example. Nothing was removed from SUVs because it's perfectly fine as it is. Nothing was removed from compacts apart from making something raceable. The Bison obviously removed from vans to utility, along with a few others. So you can kind of get a glimpse of the other side of it by looking at this other sheet and see, you know, this is showing you what the new classes would be like. And that's what we've mostly gone through on this in this video. And this is showing you sort of the change to the existing classes that you'd see. And you'll see utility sort of gets completely gutted. And there's only the top two remaining. And then it becomes a much more interesting class when you add all the stuff back in. So yeah, I'll leave a link to the playlist. I'll leave a link to the spreadsheet down below in the description and the pinned comment, so you can have a look for yourself. Obviously, this final sheet as well only shows the changes. So if you just want to see, you know, without all the stuff that stayed the same, you can just see the sports that have moved to supers. Well, the things that are now in supers, the things that are now in sports, the things that are now in muscle, where they've moved from. And yeah, this is just showing you basically, you know, obviously Sports Classics got a lot of new vehicles from sports, from muscle, from sedans, a couple of from sedans actually. Coupes got a number of vehicles coming from the sports class. That's on this final sheet. And also if you scroll to the right, you can see sort of the changes. Cars that were removed from each class and cars that were added. And yeah, 38 cars were removed from sports. 5 of them were added back from the supers class, I think. In fact, I think, yeah, those 5 cars 4 of the cars that were removed from supers were put into sports, I'm pretty sure. And then one of the non-raceable sports counts for that as well. But yeah, you can see sort of the biggest winners and losers in terms of class sizes. Obviously, Sports Classics had nothing removed from it. I think everything in Sports Classics is where it should be. Same with SUVs, same with compacts. They've just had cars added to it that would make it more appropriate and a more well-rounded class. And Sports Classics was the biggest change. It had the most cars added to it with 23. Obviously, Sports was always going to be the one that had the biggest decrease with 38. Muscle quite a lot as well. But then you've got, you know, utility gained a massive amount with 19 new cars. And only 4 removed, so it's a big net difference. And a lot of non-raceable utility stuff, just might as well put it into a more appropriate class like industrial. So yeah, that's it. It's been a a rambly one, a waffly one. Not everybody likes this style, I guess, in terms of videos, but it's the only real way to get this out, I think. And hopefully I've been able to show it in a good enough way. I felt like basing it on the spreadsheet like this and moving things around like this was the only real way to do it when there's just so many vehicles to look at. Let me know what you agree with and what you disagree with down below in the comments. And by all means, click the link in the description to check out the spreadsheet and peruse through it yourself. See what you agree with, what you don't agree with. You might, you can make a copy of it if you want and make your own classes up from it. I feel like I'm on the money with most of it. Most of it is fairly uncontroversial, and I think some of the more some of the ones that you might disagree with, I probably don't care about that much either. Certain ones that I think, they could probably fit in 2 classes, and I've just chosen one side, and you might choose a different side or something like that, like the Comet Safari that I was talking about, for example. But yeah, let me know what you think, specifically about some of the bigger changes. For example, utility being so big with all these different vehicles, and sports classics getting a lot of vehicles from muscle and sports that are in those different ranges. I think those are the biggest. Those are the changes that would have the biggest impact on sort of racing and would have made the biggest difference to our experience racing with a lot of these classes in the game. Obviously, it's nice to have stuff like the Moonbeams in the Vans class and the Blister Compacts in the Compacts class that we've talked about all these years, but the impact of that on the day-to-day racing wouldn't be that big. It's some of these, sedans having a lot of vehicles added to it, sports classics, coupes, stuff like that. Let me know your thoughts on those, and how close am I to getting this about right? Would you be, I guess, overall, would you be happier with my class system, or would you rather stick with Rockstar's class system? Let's put it that way. But yeah, that's it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. I know it's been a long time that I've promised this video, but I hope it's been worth the wait. And it's finally nice to sort of, at the very end of GTA 5's life, put things right, even if it's just for this video and on this channel and not in real life. So yeah, thank you guys very much, and I'll see you next time.